This amp is tiny, but can it make its rated power? Let's find out. For this test right here, the amp is wired to a 4 ohm 500 watt resistor, and we're going to be measuring the output and the distortion with these two devices right here. Pay attention to this LED. When it lights up red, we hit 1% total harmonic distortion. Playing a 40 hertz test tone, that happens at 260 watts, which is more than the 4 ohm power rating, but there is a problem. I've got the gain turned up all the way, I've got the bass knob turned up all the way, and I can't get the amp to clip. That's because I'm using my cell phone as a source unit. It just doesn't have enough output voltage to drive this amp to its full potential. So I've got to do something about that. So it's over to the CNC machine to cut out a single DIN sized hole in this scrap piece of MDF so I can repurpose this old CD player as my head unit for these amp tests. With a new source unit on the test bench, let's run the 4 ohm test again. And we get 276 watts at 1% THD. So about 10% more than the official power numbers, which is a reasonable margin of error. No inflated power numbers, no sandbagging, just a good, honest power rating. Rolling up to clipping, we get 282 watts. So what exactly is this little amp? This is the SS600 from DD Audio. If you need something compact and powerful to hide under a seat, tuck someplace out of the way, this is exactly what you're looking for. It is 5 3/4 of an inch by 4.6 inches by about 2 inches. When I say it's tiny, I mean it is tiny. It is not that much bigger than my cell phone. In spite of the small size, it's got every feature that you're gonna need in an amplifier. It has high and low level inputs, a bass boost, a low pass filter, an infrasonic filter, and of course the sensitivity knob for setting your gain. Speaking of knobs, it does come with a bass knob. For those not familiar with the brand, Digital Designs is an American company. They're headquartered in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. They're really kind of big in the competition scene. Their top-end subwoofers are custom made in the USA. They'll even let you pick out colors for the basket, the cone, and the dust cap. I'm not aware of any other company that does that. I would definitely call them a premium brand that makes quality gear. Definitely not budget gear, but I've yet to find any budget gear that could cram this much power into a package this small. Well, how much power? It's rated for 250 watts into 4 ohms. We just saw that that's not a problem for this amp. 350 into 2 ohms and 600 watts at 1 ohm. And you can see here on this side of the amp where the 4-gauge power and ground terminals are, along with the speaker terminals and the remote turn-on wire. You've got two 30 amp fuses, so 60 amps of total fusing, which is exactly what you should expect for an amp that claims to do 600 watts into a 1 ohm load. But why trust their claims when we can just test it and find out for sure? So let's hook it up to a 2 ohm load. You can see here that my test bench is not fancy. I've got a real low-tech way of switching from 4 ohms to 2 ohms. I just switched the wires over to the 2 ohm terminals where I have 2 of these 500 watt resistors wired in parallel. Let's flip the head unit on and play that 40 hertz test tone. And this thing smashes right past its 2 ohm power rating, pumping out 450 watts at 1% total harmonic distortion. Rolling up to clipping, we can squeeze another 8 watts out of the amp. There is no doubt in my mind this thing's gonna make its 1 ohm power rating, but before we test it, why don't we crack it open and see what's inside? I'm not an amp technician, so I'm really not sure what I'm looking at here. The only reason why I crack open these amplifiers is so that you can see what's inside them without having to crack open your amp. Looking inside, the layout is really compact. There is no wasted space in this amp. While we're checking out the amp guts, I want to give a big shout out to all of my supporters, both my patrons on Patreon and my channel members. $10 patrons get their name in the video. $25 and up patrons get that, plus a big shout out. So thank you to Jonathan, Joaquin, JD America, Timothy, and Bo. Click right up here to join the guys on Patreon and get behind the scenes content. And while I'm saying thanks to people, a big thanks to Digital Designs for sending out this amplifier for me to test. And of course, the fact they sent it to me has no impact on the test. Let's check out that 1 ohm test. We get 589 at 1% total harmonic distortion, and then when we roll it up to clipping, we get 599 watts. But my power supplies were set to 14 volts. If we crank it on up to 14.8 volts, we get a different result. This time we both distort and clip at 617 watts. I did that because I wanted to show you just how important your electrical system is in your car. In the real world, it's one of the main limiting factors. Speaking of the real world, in the real world, you don't play a 40 hertz test tone into resistors, you play into actual subwoofers. You know, it'd be really cool is if I had a DD Audio subwoofer to go with this DD Audio amplifier. Good thing they sent me one. Working on a full review of this preloaded subwoofer enclosure right now. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss that video. With the gain and the head unit and the bass knob all the way up, I got 476 watts into 2.1 ohms. The rattling you're hearing in the video is just all the stuff in my garage. It's not the subwoofer. My contact at Digital Design said they put a lot of extra work and effort into getting the thermal management on this thing just right. And after all this testing, it's barely warm to the touch. Let's try it out on some music. You'll notice the power numbers are just jumping around everywhere. You'll see a couple of times it'll pop up above 500 watts, and then this happened right here. 843 watts at 0.1 ohm, which is why you never want to wire a 1 ohm stable amplifier at less than 1 ohm. I'm Justin, this is the DIY Audio Guy YouTube channel, and I will see you on the next adventure.